Now, talk a little bit about the B. Arthur incident. Jeff, hardcore comedy fans will know that you and B developed a relationship, and it came off of an incident at one of the Comedy Central roasts.
B. Arthur was one of those people who I grew up saying she really is one of the funniest people. You know, I would see her do stuff and see my, family crack up at the Golden Girls. And when she was on All in the Family, I was a little boy.
Oh, sure.
But I didn't ever think I'd be in the same room with her in a million years, you know? This is like, it couldn't possibly happen. So there we are. Suddenly now I find myself producing these Comedy Central roasts for the Friars Club. I'm like a guy who would help put together the dais, the comedians. I'd help people write their material. And Jerry Stiller agreed to be roasted. It was a big honor to him to have a Friars roast. His whole life, he said that's something he really wanted. And his son Ben Stiller came, and Janine Garofalo, and Jason Alexander, who was at the height of his fame on Seinfeld with Jerry Stiller at the time, and Kevin James, and let's see, a bunch of other funny people did that one.
Well, Seinfeld wasn't there, and you had a memorable line about why he wasn't there.
I said, Jerry Seinfeld wanted to be here today, but he's fucking a model on a pile of cash. But I didn't, sort of a surprise to me, there's B. Arthur. I probably knew she was going to be there, but it didn't really register of like, wow, I'm up here with her. And I felt a little guilty not mentioning her. I loved her. I mean, she was somebody who, according to the people who wrote for the Golden Girls and so on, and that she was, and Maude, that she could, if you wrote a B joke in the script, she could turn it into an A joke, a home run, if you will, just by a look or adding a little eyebrow to it, and suddenly you had a great big blow, a great act break or whatever. Mm-hmm. She would just save the day all the time with for the writers. Not to say that they didn't have good writers on those shows, but she really could make the writers look good. And I was like, wow, I just can't imagine not calling her out or mentioning her. And I didn't really think to say anything sincere. That wasn't my style back then. I just was swinging for home runs, as Milton advised. And here I was just a few years after my first roast, and now we're on TV, So now there's cameras that you could have a close-up. You can make fun of somebody and get right in their face. And I write down in the margin, I have my script of all the jokes I've been working on, and I write down in the margin, B. Arthur's dick. I don't know what I'm going to say yet, or where, or when, but I'm late in the show, and I'm just watching this all go down, and I'm just thinking, somewhere in here, they got to mention B. Arthur's dick. She's the new Milton Berle. And Sandra Bernhard, who I actually love seeing at these roasts because she always tries something different. And this time she tried singing to Jerry Stiller. She was doing a cabaret show at the time, and she had a little band put together. And she always tries something different, and I love that about her. And she went out and sang... I forgot, but she put Jerry's name into a song. It was like Magic Man or something. I can't remember. Somebody.
Oh, it was a Heart song. It was.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
And didn't necessarily go over as big as she had hoped. And Jerry Stiller, she kind of did she like writhed on him. She gave him a little lap dance while she sang it, which, if you know Jerry, he doesn't like cursing, let alone he would wince. He'd get very embarrassed, especially with his wife and his son, Ben Stiller, and Ann Mira sitting not far away. And I think it was a little awkward. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I get introduced. So I don't even get one joke out. I just go, Sandra Bernhard, holy shit, I wouldn't fuck you with B. Arthur's dick. And boom. I might as well have just gotten off on that joke. The joke's okay, but they cut to her looking at me as if it was a scene in a sitcom. And she didn't have a response. She just stared at me and let the laugh go and go and go and go. And then she did the finger. She looked at me like, I'm going to get you, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And she just made my B joke into an A moment. And it made me realize, you know, how important it is to connect, you know, not just read a bunch of jokes off a piece of paper, but, you know, find moments that are real moments and look at the other person and try to make it personal. Don't say joke about someone, say it to them. And that's one of the tricks. And she, you know, I didn't really see her afterwards. I didn't think too much about it because I did the rest of my roast and I had other responsibilities that day. And then as the weeks and days and weeks went on, I was hearing about this joke everywhere I went. People would stop me on the street and yell, B. Arthur's dick. And people would send me pictures of B. Arthur and constantly quote that joke. And I realized that the joke was more famous than I was because they wouldn't even know my name, but they knew that I told that joke. And I go, gosh, wow, if I'm hearing about it, I wonder what she's hearing, you know? Someone must be saying something about it to her. And I remember it got written up in Time Out New York as one of the great TV moments of the year. And suddenly I thought, this is like, I'm making a career off this ridiculous improv. And quite a bit of time went by, and it became so out of control that I thought I needed to talk to her about it. I wanted it to be a good memory for her and not weird. And I hadn't done it. I wasn't the roast master, general, whatever back then. I was just a comedian doing the roast, and I wanted B. Arthur to be my friend if I ever saw her again. I don't know. I don't know why I did it. I guess I just felt like I needed some sort of closure with it. And I saw that she was doing a one-woman show in L.A. at some theater. It was a benefit for, I believe, an animal charity of some kind. So I bought one ticket. I bought flowers. I went to see this show. And it was great. And she sang and told funny stories. And she did the whole thing barefoot at a theater, very beautiful theater in L.A. And there was a long line of well-wishers afterwards. I somehow got my way backstage. And I waited to the end. I got at the very end of the line because I wanted to be able to talk to her and not just rush through for a picture or a handshake. And I handed her flowers, and she said, thank you. I said, B, maybe I even said Miss Arthur. I don't know if you remember me, but we met at Jerry Stiller's. And she goes, you nailed me, you prick.
That's great.
And, you know, we took some pictures, and she gave me a nice hug, and she wound up coming back to the roast. She did the Pam Anderson roast after that, and so it was good that I went, I think, and it was a fond memory. She was still one of my all-time favorite funny people.
I remember meeting B. Arthur just once, and it was like, it wasn't even like, you know, trying to be funny. It was at some event, and I was backstage, and I run into B. Arthur, and she goes, you know, hi, Gilbert, how are you? And I said, oh, fine, B. And she goes, so you're still living in the same place? And I go, yeah. And you? And she goes, yeah. And then we're talking, making small talk uncomfortably, and then there's a pause, and B. Arthur goes, do I really know you, or do we just know each other from TV? And I said, I think we know each other from TV. And she turns around and walks away.
Oh, wow. 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 You think she was trying to be funny?
I don't know. I figure It was one of those. It really was one of those moments. We both saw each other on TV, and we assumed we knew each other, but we really didn't. So she knew there was nothing to talk about. And now let's talk about this. Was one of my finest moments. And you were the producer and the MC and everything. That was at the Hugh Hefner roast.
Oh, in 2001.
Yeah.
I was not the MC, but I was one of the comedians, and I did produce that show. It was just, 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks after
Yeah.
9/11.
There was still like black smoke in the air all over New York.
They elected a new pope.
That's white smoke, Jeff.
Oh, well, it's white smoke. We were going to do the Hugh Hefner roast in New York, and there hadn't been he had been the biggest roastie we had done. You know, this was Hugh Hefner at the height of his ridiculousness with 7 blonde girlfriends, and it was going to be a great roast. I mean, we had so many funny people lined up, and suddenly, you know, plans change. There was 9/11, and everything obviously shut down in New York. You didn't know what. It was scary, and we all know what that's about. And were you in New York at the time?
Oh, yeah.
I was in
Yeah,
L.A.,
it was-
actually.
And, you know, there's a couple days there where you don't know what's going on. And, you know, as a comedian, you're like, all right, well, I'm going to have some time off. This is
Yeah.
not going to be, you know, there's no late night shows. There's no Saturday Night Live. There's no comedy clubs. The world has changed. Even,
Yeah, I remember all of New York was walking around like zombies.
right.
And I remember I was riding down an elevator in my building. There was a guy standing there. And neither one of us said anything. We just kind of like looked at each other and sort of slightly shrugged our shoulders. There was like nothing to be said.
Everybody was speechless. And, you know, all the news was that it was all bad. And there was, you know, missing people. So it was an emergency lockdown.
There was, that's something for people not New York. There was all over the city on fences photos of people, like they were still looking for them, hoping they would show up, hoping they had amnesia from the event and would pop up somewhere.
You know, and I remember Dave Chappelle was in my. I had Dave Chappelle and Adam Ferrara, the 2 comedians, were living further downtown, and they came to my apartment at 300 Mercer Street, and we spent the night just sort of up on the roof, and we walked around, and it was kind of like you want to give blood, but there were no survivors, so the hospital sent us away, and you just sort of, you know, you twiddle your thumbs, and you go, I'm in the middle of a war zone, and I can't do anything to help myself or help anybody else.
And I remember with the photos on the fences, all I could think is like, oh my God, don't these people know these people aren't going to just pop up?
Right. So, what do? You know, you know, I'm in my apartment, and I go. Even my manager at the time, Bernie Brillstein, was scared.
Yeah.
When old people are scared, you go, "This is some serious shit. What the hell is happening here?" And you know, you start to figure out, all right, it was a terrorist attack, and it seems to be over, and now it's. New York smells, it's smoldering, and you know everybody's walking around, including me, with your mouth and nose covered by your shirt because you're essentially inhaling the World Trade Center
Yeah.
and everything that was inside.
You're inhaling ashes of dead people.
Right. So you start to get stir crazy, and by that weekend, I went down the street from my apartment to the Comedy Cellar, And the only people there were the stragglers, tourists, essentially from other countries, who couldn't get out of New York.
Right, because all the airports were shut down.
And they were either crashing on couches or in hotels, and they wandered into the Comedy Cellar for some air conditioning and maybe an hour of thinking about something else. And I remember doing a couple jokes. I can't remember what they were. But I said, no, that kind of felt good, actually. It's not for the general public, just for the few people that want to hear them. Here they come down to the Comedy Cellar, and then I go home that night, and I'm like, fuck, man, it's a cliche now. But back then you say, well, the show must go on or the terrorists win. The terrorists win. That's all you ever heard. If you don't go on with, and at this point, they were winning. We were fucked. This was 3,000 dead people in the Pentagon, and this was like, all is lost. And I go, well, now it's a few days later, and I go, what are we going to do with this roast? We have all these trucks and camera trucks and crew on rented. We have the Hilton rented. It's all paid for, and we have to decide basically by Monday afterwards if we're gonna cancel it, or we have to commit to these expenses. And with Comedy Central, there's always this lavish party afterwards, and it's a black tie affair, and it would be inappropriate. But I thought, well, what if we cancel the party but do the show? What if we give all the proceeds to the party to the Twin Tower Fund and make this almost a benefit? In fact, the first benefit post 9/11 would be October 2nd. So I wrote a letter out to the Friars Club and to Comedy Central and to Hugh Hefner. And I sent it to all of them on that weekend, and the response started coming in. And the hardest part would be how to get Hugh Hefner and his blonde pussy posse out to New York, because none of the comedians were necessarily going to come unless, they felt safe. And it was Jimmy Kimmel was going to MC, and there was Adam Carolla and Cedric the Entertainer and Sarah Silverman, and all these other people that were coming just to be there. There's you and Ice-T, and Stephen Colbert was there, Stephen Carell was there, and I think Triumph and those Smigel was there, and it was taking hold that if Hef would come, then everybody would. And my point in the letter was that Hef is the very reason the terrorists hate us. He's a pornographer, and he's a very outspoken person about free speech. He was the first club owner, casino owner to book black comedians to do a regular stand-up act, and I knew Dick Gregory was going to come out.
He was at the roast.
And if you cancel this, it really is the terrorists one more little notch on their victory belt. They go, this is the very guy the terrorists hate. Fuck it. Let's just do a show, and whatever it is, it'll be a document of that time, and maybe it'll be a feel good to the people that are there, and maybe it won't. But canceling it just didn't sit well with me. And Hef, to his credit, came out, and Sarah and Jimmy and all those funny comedians came out. We did still put on our tuxedos out of respect for Hef, and it wound up being not just a good show, but like a great show. I remember the mayor of New York sent a proclamation giving us his blessing, and I remember it being extremely well attended, packed to the roof at the New York Hilton. And Jimmy Kimmel did an amazing job as the host. He really set the tone, and he got the first laughs and kind of got the thing rolling. And I felt a sense of sort of relief, like a little tension came out of everybody's shoulders. People were laughing. Rob Schneider, who is a funny guy, went on, and he had a couple good jokes, and a couple jokes didn't work. And there hadn't been a reference to 9/11 really in the show yet. And I ran over and I put my arm around him in front of everybody, and I said, Rob, let's keep going. Let's get on with it. Hasn't there been enough bombing in this city? Which is an easy joke, but the right joke in the moment. And it wound up being one of the best. And then Gilbert went on at the end and ruined everything. Gilbert went on that night and told a joke about wanting a connection. Well, maybe you should tell it.
Yeah, I said, I have to leave early tonight. I have to fly out to L.A. I couldn't get a direct flight. We have to make a stop at the Empire State Building.
And somebody yelled too soon.
And I thought it meant I didn't take a long enough pause between the setup and the punchline when he said that. Thought I should have said 2, 3, 4. Empire State Building. And that's what that moment to me also symbolizes how people take offense and what they're okay with. And because it was like after they're booing and hissing and getting up from their tables, and then I go into the aristocrats where I'm talking about the mothers fucking the son and the dogs blowing the father, and they're like cheering. And I thought, so terrorist attacks are bad taste, but incest and bestiality are fine.
You were just warming up, and they were going to go on that journey, or at least some of them were, and some of them weren't. But when somebody yelled too soon, and you heard that, did you start to panic?
I remember being well, I certainly had that feeling after the joke when they yelled too soon that I don't know if I was there for like 3 seconds or 200 years. Because it's like I'd lost the audience as much as anybody has ever lost an audience.
But you adjusted and went. Did you stick with your plan, or did you?
Yeah,
did you plan to do the aristocrats?
No. I just figured at this point there's nothing further to lose. I might as well talk about a boy eating his mother's twat, you know. So I go into that, and it's like they're cheering. You know, it was like...
I remember it being cathartic. I remember looking to my left and seeing Jimmy Kimmel essentially crying with laughter. And I remember seeing Rob Schneider at a certain point fall off his chair and was like crawling on the floor.
Yes, he was rolling around on the floor. And that was like the greatest moment for me was like, aside from the audience cheering and laughing, was getting to look at the other comics on the dais laughing.
How many times have you had previously told that joke?
I don't think I've ever told it on stage before.
Really?
Yeah, in person. I mean, I've told it. But I don't think I've ever... I think that's the first time I've ever said it on stage.
Were you doing jokes in your act at that point?
Yeah. I started off with... I said, tonight I'll be going by my Muslim name, Hasn't Been Laid. And I remember I was following Ice-T, and Ice-T was up there going, you know, I'm going to kill you white motherfuckers, and I'm going to rape you white bitches. Right. So I went on and said, Ice-T stole my whole act. And I said, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm going to kill you white motherfuckers, and I'm going to rape some of you white bitches.
Is my recollection correct? Were you wearing a waiter's jacket? So there's the added element of complete silliness.
Oh, my God. It was...
Why were you wearing a waiter's jacket?
A white tuxedo jacket?
Yes, a long white tuxedo jacket like that a dorky teenager would have as a graduation. I got that jacket when 14th Street still had shitty places around where you could go into a store and buy anything, and you didn't know... And it was so cheap, you just bought it. And there was like...
It was like a prom tux.
Yeah. And there was a tuxedo place going out of business.
Darren's laughing.
on 14th Street. And there was this white tuxedo jacket, long white, like the length that Groucho Marx would wear. And one of those bits were practically to my ankles. A bright white tuxedo. And I think I got it for like $5.
Wow.
So I wore that, and I had I had a bow tie that I bought in another store for about 25 cents. And
Just for the roast?
I had already had this in my closet, and I thought, "Oh, I'm doing a roast. This'll be. I've got the perfect outfit."
So the Twin Towers collapsed, and you went right down to the neighborhood for some going out of business sales.
God.
I wanted to honor the death of 3,000 people with a $5 tuxedo.
Unreal.
It was all I had that shit lying around my apartment, thinking I'll never use this, and then when
You wear a red tie?
I think it was a black tie. I'm not sure.
It's a black.
I'll have to look.
I'm sorry, I know this, but it was a black tie
okay.
and a white tuxedo jacket.
And then when the plane crashed into the World Trade Center, I thought, oh, I can put on that jacket now.
Gilbert, I have to ask: was this the 9/11 material? Was it something that you came up with that night? Was it something that you thought about for weeks?
No. I had it was like shortly before I was like just sort of thinking of it.
And you thought, I'm the guy that's going to go for this.
Yeah. I want to be the first one to make the most obscenely tasteless September 11th joke.
And then an ad lib leads to a movie.
Yeah.
You
know what? They didn't even know about that.
Yeah.
They interviewed me for The Aristocrats, Paul Provenza and Penn, and they didn't know about it, believe it or not. And I said, is this the joke? Are you guys talking about the joke that Gilbert did at the 9/11 reel? And it didn't occur to me that we didn't use that part of your act on the broadcast on Comedy Central. So unless you were there, they didn't know you did the Aristocrats joke, and I didn't really know the joke, and I didn't even realize when they first asked me to be a part of that documentary that's the same joke you did, and I said, "Oh, you got to track down Paul Provenza. His movie, you got to see when Gilbert did that joke." They didn't even know, and I couldn't believe that they didn't know. I was like,
corrected.
"You're making this not knowing that happened?"
I always thought the incident inspired
Of course.
Paul and Penn to do the film.
No, I told them, and then I helped them track down the rough footage because I had worked on that show. So I was very proud that they did indeed track you down and broke that into the documentary. As essentially became the soul of that movie, which showed all the comedians, and I thought it was a very cool doc and showed what we do as an art form, not necessarily as. It was just great. It showed comedy as jazz, and it showed how different personalities, make a difference. And then you and Bob Saget were the heart of that movie, I thought.
And I remember when they showed it on TV. You don't see the Aristocrats, obviously, or they just have to play a siren through the whole thing as a bleep. And it's like, I think about 80% of what I did was cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all right. It's a movie, but people got that, and I love that we our little 9/11 Hugh Hefner roast is still something comedy fans are talking about.